So we're in the publishing business. The part of the business that I have always found the most exciting is school publishing. The part of the business that will soon come to an end, and you're going to hear me talk about this, is school publishing. It is simply unsustainable. So maybe just a word about us and who we are. As I said, we are publishers. I thought I should offer something of a caveat, because I was afraid that you may never have met a publisher before. I mean, after all, we are ancient things, artifacts that perhaps belong in a museum somewhere. What makes us rare is that we are a successful Canadian publisher. I mean, you read about the dire predictions of the future of publishing, and here you are with a successful publisher talking to you. It is, as I say, something of a rarity. I wanted also to say that although I'll be very critical of education, and I use the word education broadly, I don't want you to think it's sour grapes. We're very successful publishers. If we don't publish here, we'll publish there. We do what we enjoy, we do what we do so well, and whether we do it for schools and for teachers and for students, or do it for someone else, is probably in the end not going to matter, although, as I said, my passion is for school publishing. And finally, I ask the rhetorical question, because I will say a word or two about teaching. Who am I to talk about teaching? Well, I began teaching at Dalhousie University in 1973. So I'm almost as old as a textbook. I continue to teach, although I'm on that downward slope at Osgoode Hall Law School, York University. And in fact, I've had to leave a graduate class to come and spend some time with you. And I do it without apology. This is what I love to do. This is where I wanted to be. So I know a little bit about teaching, although, to be fair, it is teaching at the university level and not teaching at the school level. So that's just a little bit about me. Then I wanted to think a little bit about how I might organize today. The title is an interesting one. If textbooks are dead, what will rise from the ashes? Well, I think the assumption is that textbooks are dead, because the focus of this presentation might be what's rising from the ashes. I thought I might reflect a little bit on what a textbook is. I might try and address the question as to whether or not they are dead, what we mean by the word dead, and then I thought I might say a word or two about what might rise from the ashes, but that will just be by way of transitioning in to all the good stuff you're going to hear from Jim, because he's doing some very important and interesting research at OISE about the way in which technology is going to improve the teaching and the learning experience for both the teacher and the student. The modern textbook is changing. And I want to say at the outset, when I use the word textbook, I don't want you to think I'm talking of these artifacts. Something you would expect, I suspect, to find in a museum. Let me just pass a few around. You can feel them. You can just try to remember what it was like when you were younger. Here's a book that we built a couple of years ago. Black History is the title of the book. We thought rather than spending resources putting security guards in schools, what we would do is we would inspire students with a book that spoke to them, their history, their culture, who they are in this world. And through the empowerment of the book, we would eliminate the need for the security guard. We have had no success. The security guards are there, the books are not. But as you read that Black History book, or as you thumb through the Black History book, you're going to say to yourself, this is tragic. That a resource like this will never be created again because books are dead. I mean, books as we understand them are dead. So as I said, I'm not talking about those printed books necessarily. We create books, and how they come off or out of the creative process is as you wish. It can be as that, it can be as an e-book, of course, both rather static, as you'll hear from Jim. There can be interactive elements that we build onto it. There's always an extensive teacher resource that goes with it that speaks of pedagogy and how the book and the curriculum work well together to achieve the objectives that we have for our students. And those are big objectives. It's not just knowledge, it's about building skills, creative problem solving, the capacity to analyze, the whole series of objectives. So that's what a book is. Will it continue in that form? The answer is, I think, no. It will be certainly thinner. What you have in your hand is something in the neighborhood of a $300,000–400,000 investment. That investment is made without the promise of a single sale. So what the hell were you thinking? What we were thinking is that we could make a contribution, that we could make a difference. And so we began to build these books. What does the build look like? The build is extraordinarily extensive. We contract with the best teachers, the master teachers. We contract with the best consultants. Those people who are experts in curriculum and pedagogy, we work with them. The best designers, the best editors, we work with the best of everyone to build those resources. And they are, I think you'll agree. Pardon?
I assisted editor one of your books.
Well, there you are. I mentioned the word best, and best is sitting right in front of me.
Outstanding publisher.
An outstanding publisher. An outstanding publisher.
Order of Ontario.
That's right. Located here in Ontario. We make this huge commitment to Ontario because that's where we live and that's who we are. But you'll worry at the end of this talk about whether this is going to continue. So, I talk a little bit about textbooks. I talk about them changing. They're becoming thinner. They are electronic. And increasingly, they're becoming more interactive. So that the book you buy today is not necessarily bound like that, although that is a special product. Very tactile. It encourages deep, immersive reading, something that doesn't happen very well on the internet. It does all of that. It's getting thinner. It's probably a combination of thinner and electronic aspects to it that are linked to videos and increasingly becoming interactive. So that's the book. Will they disappear? I don't know whether they'll disappear. I rather suspect they will disappear. They'll certainly disappear as that large tome that you remember as the textbook. That is certainly dead. It's not to return again. Whether the things that you're handling will disappear is a good question. I'm not sure. They might disappear. I think the reason why they will disappear, if they do disappear, is this, and that is, education is diverting its resources to technology. I return to that phrase I used a few moments ago, when politicians lead, they get it wrong. I'm not against technology. There's technology everywhere. There's technology in all the things that I do with my students. There's technology everywhere. I'm not saying it's bad. But what's happened is there's been a massive investment in technology. A massive investment in the hardware, the iPads, for example, to the extent that the investment outstrips the resources of the board rather cleverly introduces a bring your own device policy. So they offload the technology purchase onto the parents. There are some consequences to that, not the least of which is the parents are now paying, but there will be other consequences I'll talk about in a moment. So massive investments in technology, beginning with the hardware. I was fascinated to see that the Lakeland District School Board has just spent $2.5 million, almost all of it directed towards iPads. They might have found something of interest in the experience from Los Angeles in one of its school districts that bought 18,000 iPads, and they asked one of the students who was using the iPad how he liked it. He said, "I love it. I can play soccer about 90% of the day. It's fantastic." So there's nothing about the technology that necessarily improves the teaching or the learning. It may, but it won't necessarily. So that's the hardware. The software, huge investments in software, primarily you'll note at the learning management level. And there's no question it has made managing the learning, I emphasize managing the learning better. So there's no question about that, but they have been significant investments. Desire to Learn, Blackboard, Moodle, very large investments in software, and it has made the managing easier and better. And for that I applaud, although I worry a little bit about the amount of money that's been spent on technology. There's another area of investment, and that is in the infrastructure itself. No point having the technology if you don't have the bandwidth. So we're going to have to expand the bandwidth so that the schools become Wi-Fi enabled. And that's another big investment. And so that's what we're seeing. Massive investments in all three areas. Now try and imagine the kind of investments that are being made in content and pedagogy. The answer is surprisingly little. We are out every day talking to schools, and the principal says we have a no textbook policy. Well, we'd be happy to provide it to you in another format. It need not be as that ancient artifact. Well, let me explain the situation. The principal says, we have $1,200 left for this department. $1,200. And out of that budget, the department head is going to have to buy all of the resources for the department. She thought she might start with a new chair for one of the teachers. There goes the first $400. Then we've got the pens and the, whatever we've got, you know, all that other stuff. He said, I might be able to buy 3 books. That's the kind of situation we face, and we see it day after day. There is absolutely little to no spending being done on content. And I think the losers are first the teachers, because I'm going to talk in a moment about what the teachers are doing to solve the no content problem. Certainly the students. There is, I can tell you as a university professor, there is no substitute for what you have in your hand. If what you're trying to do is build focus, the capacity to undertake deep, immersive reading without distraction. Just think of that internet screen that you see and that your children see, your students see. It's a mechanism for building analytical and critical skills that is difficult to replicate. Now, it can be replicated, and certainly it'll be replicated in the collaborative works that students do in the classroom. But I must, on the topic of collaborative work, tell you this story. Speaking of technology, some things that you think you can count on, you can't count on. Certainly, sitting on this table is not going to work for me. Here's my story. I love telling stories. Storytelling, of course, is the way in which we communicate with one another. So here's my story about collaborative work. I'm in favor of it. I am the director of a Master's of Law program at Osgoode that focuses on dispute resolution. Huge opportunities for collaborative work, understanding conflict, understanding the way in which conflict and disputes might be resolved. Lots of opportunity for that. So here's my story. It's a story with one of my colleagues who's the leading expert in the field. And he said, you know, this collaborative work is great, but quite frankly, I'm not sure I want my students having ill-informed conversations with each other that is primarily focused on expressing their views, which don't count for very much because they're not very well-informed views. I think I've got to take a much more active role in the way in which the class is taught. So collaborative work and that classroom in which you've got students working in groups, sharing ideas with one another is great, but it's got to be very carefully managed. I think it is managed well in the hands of a master teacher, but not all teachers are master teachers. So that's my story about that kind of work. Let me jump forward.
Sorry, just a reminder.
I've got 2 minutes. I don't use PowerPoints, and I don't listen to people who tell me I have to stop. Oh dear. Do you know what's happened? What happens is you reach a point in life in which you're incorrigible, and I'm getting very close to being incorrigible. So in the remaining 2 minutes, let me describe about what teachers are doing. You've got to teach the class. You've got to deliver the curriculum. You've got to build those skills in the students. You've got to do that. But you've got to do it without content. Because remember, the school's not buying content. It's buying technology, hardware, software, and infrastructure for it. So what does the teacher do? What do the students do? They go on the internet. Where else would you look? On the internet, I tell you one more story and then I'm going to stop. On the internet, you can find an extraordinary amount of open source and thus free information. Professor from MIT writes a false article, submits it to 300 open source journals. More than half were prepared to publish the article without correction. That's where the information's coming from. So you have the alternative of having me and my colleagues at Nelson and Pearson and McGraw and Oxford put these extraordinary resources into building wonderful content and learning technology, or you have the internet, and right now, for now, the choice is the internet. They may return to us and ask us again in the future for assistance, but my fear is that it isn't the textbook that's dead, it's the creative class that's been building these resources for teachers and students, especially in Ontario. And I am a representative of that class, and we are very nearly dead. You've been sold a bill of goods. The technology may deliver in the future. It may do the things that Jim is investigating. It may deliver the promise that he imagines. But right now, your teachers and your students are stuck without the resources they need. Let me stop there. I've gone 2 minutes over 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thanks so much, Paul, so I'm going to give a quick intro to Jim.
Does he want a question?
I think we'll keep Q&A at the end.
Yeah.
Because so we will try to do that in the final 10 or 15 minutes. So next presenter will be Jim Slotta. Jim Slotta is Associate Professor of Education at OISE, University of Toronto, where he holds a Canada Researcher in Education and Technology. And he directs a lab called Incore Lab with a team of talented students, designers, developers who investigate collaborative inquiry learning in formal and informal settings. And he collaborates with researchers from around the world, including Oslo, Chicago, and Berkeley, to develop a scalable architecture for interactive learning, as well as a framework for smart classroom research called SEO Smart Space. His research-funded projects have examined the use of embedded phenomenon in elementary classrooms, and also distributed and ubiquitous learning in high school physics, and also an immersive reinforced simulation for high school biology. Together, this project have advanced a theoretical model called knowledge community inquiry. Professor Slotta and his team has published their work widely with more than 50 papers presented at major conferences in the past 3 years. Taken together, this work examines how students can become a knowledge community supported with technology, and also to enable inclusive participation and promote the growth of the idea of the students. So let's welcome Jim to talk about this work.
I'm used to having my computer in front of me so I can see, so now I have to turn to watch the screen. And I guess I almost don't have to give my talk now because Kodong told you the whole thing. But, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for going out of your way to attend a conference that's obviously, multidisciplinary and probably supplemental to your own work. How many teachers are here in the audience? K-12? So I'm not sure where other people are coming from, but my work is in K-12. It's typically in secondary science. I do a little bit in primary. I tried to think about textbooks. It's not really where I usually think. I mean, if I do think about textbooks, I think about open source textbooks, which I would probably have a an interesting alternative opinion about the future of open source. I know that there are problems on open source, but I come from a physics background, and when I go to Wikipedia in the physics category, it's the most splendid, cooperatively edited and architected and maintained resource. And if I was a teacher, it would be the first place I would go for credible content. To make sure I wanted the most credible content, I would go to Wikipedia. So that's just an aside, and I don't deny that there are issues and debates there. I'm also not sure if it's textbooks that are dying. Again, some people out here may know this this issue much better than I. I tend to work in the ivory tower, and I'll explain my work. But generally, I guess the way I think of it is that the entire educational model is kind of crumbling, K-12. I see the same thing in higher education as well. It's a longer discussion. But that old sort of paradigmatic, trundle off to the classroom and get your reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the sort of book learning, right, is something that's becoming obviated by the 21st century workplace, and it's no longer a good fit. I think this is partly why people are throwing everything, including gasoline, on the fire, trying to figure out some way to respond to something that's obviously not responding to the needs of society. And again, that's a longer debate, and I'm not an expert in the issue, but I do get a sense that there's aspects of it that are social, political, societal. Many people, Collins, Tapscott, Prensky, Robinson, are talking about it. How do you know that? Okay. In my work, I guess what I see is needed are new forms of learning and instruction that are suitable for 21st century citizens. Things that let you take realistic and rapid responses to problems, to think about issues that have not been defined until, the moment, to work with your peers, to work with peers across the country and the world, to think about transfer on a daily basis. New forms of epistemology. Why are we learning? I don't even think teachers necessarily know the answer to that question anymore, right? Why are we here, and how do we learn? And what does that mean? Does it mean read a book? I mean, I think that there's some intrinsic issues to this that, again, have nothing to do with my talk per se. I'm somebody who sort of recognized, I guess I spent about 10 years trying to build something that could go into schools in technology, and I fought real hard to build a web-based inquiry and science environment. It's still out there running. We built that in Berkeley. And I felt, as a result of the fight to make that fit the institution, that I recognized that it was time to back up, move to Canada, start a research program that's quite outside the schools in a more sort of fundamental effort to understand how people learn and what are some new ways of learning and teaching. So I'm going to talk to you today about that work because, frankly, I don't think we have those ways yet. I don't think we quite have good theoretical models for how you can transform a school, a classroom, or an individual learner's trajectory. I think we have some formative ideas about the epistemology. We have some formative ideas coming out of Web 2.0 and some of these neat knowledge society metaphors. And that's where I'm placing my bets right now. Let's see, try the arrow. So I got up here to Toronto, where there's a sort of a tradition of this knowledge community approach, or learning classrooms as communities of learners. And I was excited about this already because of Web 2.0. I guess you guys have probably all heard about Web 2. The idea that 20 million people can cooperatively edit an encyclopedia and make it kick the pants off of any encyclopedia that's been built previously and stay current and living. The idea that we can socially network, that we can aggregate our resources, maintain those aggregate representations and ameliorate them, connectivity out the wazoo in terms of semantically tagging and accessing and patterns of access and how those feed into any number of software applications currently and as yet to be defined. So it's a big new world order of the internet. I'm not saying I know where it's all going, but it was inspirational. And it's been inspirational to some thinkers about learning. That's not learning individually. I'm not there to get a good grade. It's not learning collaboratively like case-based learning or problem-based learning. It's cooperatively, collectively learning. I'm here so that we in this room can advance as a community. It's a profound epistemic shift in how we think about learning. It doesn't mean that individual and small group learning doesn't happen. So that's where I've placed my bets. That's where I'm working, kind of rehashing some stuff here, but basically that students are driving, that it's an open-ended process. There's an emphasis on community identity. And then typically in this work, there's a deep concern about discourse. So what's actually happening? Who's doing the talking? What are they talking about and why? This is Bodong's dissertation work as well, as I understand it. And he's working with Marlene Scardamelia, who's a colleague of mine at OISE. There's a few research groups who have pursued this line of thinking. In my own work, I'm concerned about secondary science, and it's not a great fit for some of these models in secondary science. I have a background in that, and I wanted to try to make a cooperative, collective form of inquiry that could help you learn evolution, biology, some tough topics there, physics, and how can we get kids to stop thinking competitively and aggressively about getting their exam scores, and how can we help teachers understand how to get their kids to learn that way. So I've come up with a new model. It's focused on multi-week, intensive, cooperative scaffolding and structure. So it's not a free form. It's not a let's see what we want to do and do it. It's extremely well scripted and choreographed. And it leverages social media and Web 2.0 kind of wiki, or now post-wiki aggregative media. And it leverages the physicality of the classroom. It uses the room, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, where you're standing in the room, who you are, who you've worked with before, what you're supposed to be doing, and what you might need to be doing that. It leverages individual handheld technologies, multi-touch tabletops, and all the kind of stuff you hear about that's getting invested in, that there are very little good models for how to use in actual learning. So I'm trying to put them into some good use. This is the model in terms of arrows and boxes, but basically through this kind of collaborative knowledge construction, a wiki-like knowledge base with tons and tons of tags and relationships are made. Those become available and important to inquiry activities. They turn into accessible learning outcomes. The inquiry activities are designed to achieve that. So for secondary science, for physics, we have to assess you in the Ontario expectations for learning. And then two important things here are those expectations, and also you're not allowed to know the answer beforehand, which really stinks. Makes it harder. So you have to do it what we call unbound, and it has to wait for the community to start defining its voice and its interests. So it's a very tricky business. It takes a couple thousand hours to make one. Individual students do learn. Because of the physics background, I tend to see them as particles going through a bubble chamber of interactions that I orchestrate, and at the end they all come in with different spins and trajectories, and we bounce them off each other, and at the end our fields have been designed to promote the learning in the direction that we want. Going fast because I want to show you some examples. It's model-based design research. So we have that model that you saw. We spend a lot of time working very closely with the teacher. I work at UTS, which is a local high school here, and we develop semester-long curricula. We don't build one-off activities, and it only works when the teacher owns it. So the teacher is the master of this thing when we're done, and they take it over and they run it. Just a word about smart classrooms. So we are, in fact, also researching technology. We need to, and we want to understand how these new technologies, these tablets, these smart boards that are so dusty in most rooms, these multi-touch tables, how they're actually going to be used constructively for a room full of people to learn in a different way. We use intelligent agents, which is a software that sort of sits underneath and behind the whole room, listening in and making executive and rapid-fire real-time data mining and programmed software interactions. So it helps coordinate like what group you're assigned to based on what you might have done before, what materials you're given based on what somebody else just uploaded, what activities you are supposed to do based on gaps that you have yet to be filled. So these agents can do that computationally. There's some wizardry in the background in terms of the messaging software, and if you ever use Google Docs, that suddenly you can both see each other editing the same document. That's using XMPP messaging, so we're using something like that. Yeah, we have a formalized open source technology architecture. We're trying to promote this kind of work, so we want others who would want to get into this to not have to build the whole thing, and in fact to join and use it. That's the overarching goal there. Here's a quick picture of the environment. This is at UTS. They've given us a dedicated room. There's a bunch of projectors, laptops, tablets, and tables. And I'm going to show you two examples so you can get your head around it a bit. First one, led by Mike Tissenbaum, who's a PhD student in his last year with me, is focused on understanding the orchestration of inquiry within a smart room, but also across many contexts. So Mike wrote, working with Sean Brooks, the physics teacher over there, a 12-week mechanics unit for high school physics, where they worked in the classroom. They also drew examples from the field, uploaded videos and pictures that they took, found stuff on the web, populated this knowledge base, tagged it all to the physics principles that were relevant, developed their own homework questions, challenged each other, did those homework questions. The teacher pulled those up in real time in the room, and then there was these intelligent agents that were grabbing this material and pushing it into a smart room environment that I'll show you in a sec. So I think I just basically said all of that. The final activity here that I'll show you the video is this solving ill-structured problems. And Mike wanted, and the teacher wanted to know if the kids could actually work with Hollywood video that violated physics or maybe didn't. But the question is, can they set those up as physics problems and solve them using the resources that have been uploaded and worked with for the whole term? And so he used the room as a way of pushing those videos around the walls and having the room itself move the kids in this wonderful sort of choreography to solve those things collaboratively. This is kind of what it looks like in an abstract symbolic format. Just for that one day in the smart room, there's a whole bunch of symbolism, and the agents are the little clouds, so not to bore you here. And a ton of materials had to be built. Again, we spent probably $150,000 to $200,000 just on making the stuff for this. 6 or 8 different tablet applications, smartboard applications, etc. A teacher tablet, so that the teacher actually had not a bystander role, but actually watched, and then had things happen on his tablet that he had in a consequential way to do in order to advance kids through. Interactive whiteboards that showed the video, that collected kids' consensus and their resources that they uploaded to set up the problem. Then they were assigned to another board, and a new batch of kids had to come inherit that work. So this is kind of what it looked like. I'm afraid it's a little dark here on this screen. But we used ambience. I don't know if you've heard that concept, but it's sort of passively present digital technology that you can glance at it. So this on the left shows you that you've got plenty of time. On the right, it shows you it's yellow. You've only got another couple minutes. When it turns red, you're about to be cut off. So the kids and the teacher were using these ambient signals, and it's also showing you where you're supposed to be in the room, but your tablet tells you that as well. So now I'll show you a quick video. I hope I can play that. And I don't know if we have audio. Ferris wheel? See? We'll see if we have audio. I might not show the whole thing. We do. So this is physics learning across contexts and environments. That's what PLACE stands for. And the wonders of... This is them working in the room on their tablets, tagging physics problems. Tablets being used for something besides soccer. That's the room assigning the kids to their station. This is the kids at 4 different video stations. That's Fast and the Furious, Iron Man, Something About Mary, and there was a 4th one, and the Hulk. They had to sort of set up whether the car could jump over the other car and what are some assumptions. You can't hear me.
Yes, that would be the music. Yeah, I can't hear it.
I'm happy to mute it.
It's a mute button on the right side.
This guy? Yeah, we don't need the industrial whatever music. So they're setting up the videos here, and basically the agents. I think the most, or is this where we are in the video? The thing that I want to most show, here's the ambient awareness, is when the room is time to make its next executive interaction. So it's giving them feedback here, shows them they finished. That the agents are sort of listening in and they're processing. You see how it reassigned them? The kids all get a little note on their tablet and off they go to their new stage. The teacher's here in the front. He's not doing any of that coordination. So it's a kind of a powerful use of the technology to help with the orchestration of this form of learning. I think I'm going to pause that there because I know I'm going to be pushing my time.
What's the teacher doing?
The teacher doing is walking around, listening to them set up. So there's one with the A team that's got the tank falling out of the heavens, and they're trying to land it in a lake that's 1.5 miles away. So they turn the turret of the tank and they start firing to make their trajectory, because they've got one chute open, but 2 chutes are broken, so they can't possibly land unless they fall into water. Can the tank do that? Set that up as a problem. So the teacher's talking to them about their setup. They're meanwhile uploading equations from physics problems that they got that the agent sent them. So the agent sent them a bunch of problems that were tagged similarly to how they tagged this one. And they're sending equations to the board. Then they have to set up the assumptions. The teacher checks, so they say they're done. The teacher gets a little thing on his tablet, and he comes over to board C and he says, "You say you're done. You're not done. You got to have, how much does the tank weigh? How much does the bullet weigh? You got some more assumptions." Or, "Yeah, that's pretty good. You're done." And he hits a tablet button that talks to the room, that talks to the kids, that talks to the agent. So it's all very wired together. And I can't go more into it, or I won't show you the second example, which is Evo Room. So we wanted to think about a new way to learn about evolution, because evolution is one of these topics that nobody ever gets success with, or less success than they want. And it's a tough one. It's got natural selection, it's got habitat adaptation, it's got a ton of variations going on at all times. And there's issues about learning that from books, as we have huge literature on certain topics that are mostly in this sort of emergent systemic equilibration type. They're just really hard to learn. I could go on about that because that was my own PhD work. We're trying to figure out if we could use this smart room to give kids a new way of learning evolution. So my student Michelle Louis, who's here, decided she could turn the whole room into an evolving ecosystem that she could play through 200 million years of time. So she built a rainforest, and she had some research questions here. She's also in her final year, also at UTS, in the same exact room. This is a diagram of her work. We had 3 stitched displays on both sides, becoming one giant display, and smart boards at the front of the room that had important things going on, a multi-touch table, and every happy kid had a tablet. There's a picture of the room in a wide angle. So these are the two. This is the kind of immersivity. There was rich media. There was audio of like crickets and rainforest sounds. And then on the front, there was an emergent representation of the kids' observations that was happening during real time as the room stepped through 8. The teacher would scrub the room through 8 time periods: 200, 150. 100, 75, 50 million years ago, and these animations on the side wall would evolve. And the kids were making observations about the evolutionary relationships that they saw, working as a knowledge community. So that's just a kind of a picture of the colorful art that Michelle rendered. She happened to be an artist coming in. That helps. So again, they had small groups working to meet up. They had prompts on their tablets. They had things that they were collecting that were getting sent to the smartboard. The teacher was watching and using that pattern to help point to evolutionary opportunities for instruction. They had an organism that they were specializing in. We also had a complex symbolic representation of this. This is my research. 6 or 7 different tablet applications. The teacher was, again, we met with the teacher every week for 2 years on her own time. I met with them when I was on sabbatical. This is the kind of thing that would bloom at the front of the room. This is an emergent cladogram that captures the 200 million years of descendancy relations amongst the organisms. And then the teacher can point to things that might have come up, like, hey, how can this thing have 2 different ancestors? That's not possible, you know. In terms of evolution, so they could use that to leverage further discussions. Students working individually, small groups, and as a whole class. And I'm going to finish with a video of the Evo room. Video. this is an overview shot. You see the stuff at the front board kind of emerging as the kids and the teacher are moving around the room. Get at the sideboard as part of a small group, another small group sitting on the floor there. That's that another version of that emergent cladogram on the front board. They're using the touch table as a reference library, sort of. Here's the teacher having small group discussion. And here's just a kind of, you can see the front board sort of populating as the kids are making their observations here. That becomes this sort of rich media resource for further instruction. I think that's probably enough on that. I'm not sure what all we've got. It's just a visually beautiful, but also a compelling pedagogical example, I think. Both Mike's and Michelle's work have advanced our own understanding of how to design these complex, social, non-individual, new kind of forms of epistemology for learning in deep, challenging secondary science concepts. So I'm going to close on that. Maybe just say, I don't think this is ready for the real world. I don't want it to be ready for the real world. I'm not trying to make this to send out to the real world. I don't think the real world is ready for this. In fact, I ran away from the real world to come here and do this because I think we need to come up with some powerful, qualified, validated examples of how learning can occur so that people can point to that in the kind of protection of the ivory tower. You try to push, this is done in a valid K-12 setting. It's done with excellent students and excellent teachers in a real school.
That's the key.
Yeah, I've worked in all kinds of schools in my prior effort with the web-based thing.
But why aren't you going to the most disadvantaged school
I wanna
to do
know-
this experiment?
Because I want to know how people learn. Do you know how people learn? You probably do. I want to know how they learn in this way. And if I have behavioral problems, if I have institutional issues, if I have communications issues, reading issues, motivational issues, technological issues, or any of those kind of issues, I can't understand the theoretical side of my work. So I need really clean, clear, motivated students and teachers in order to even show if this thing is even possible. And so what I, at least from my angle, what I try to help teachers do is think about how to become more facilitators and more tutors, and to think deeply about their pedagogical design and not just think about lesson plans and lecture notes.
Are there questions in the back?
Yes, appreciated both of the presentations. And as a writer, editor, and someone who works with a small press, obviously I will never believe books are dead. However, as a 21st century educator, and more importantly, a 21st century parent, myself, is that, and it's nice to have an in-house techie. I mean, I don't have to pay anyone anymore to come and help me when I'm having computer problems. But anyways, what I really want to address is issues that I saw, like my son is in a school 7 to 12 now, that there's a different system of resources that are being available than is previous JK to 8, where you mentioned this briefly, and this is a big concern of mine and Kiefer at generally, is where we were public education, where parents are fundraising for pencils and books. Now we are, being pulled like at the door, drop the money at the front door for the entire year to fund for the smart boards, for building the smarter classroom environments where it needs, no one's still talking, at these school council meetings about why are we doing this? We had a successful vice principal last year at the school who actually then came in for a year to do amazing things with his background in 21st century tech teaching, but now is teaching consultant at the board, because basically that was the direction of where his research was going to take him. But now you're left with all these, so technology, hard and soft, that's in the classrooms with teachers that, not all the teachers have the backgrounds, and with the BYOD policy, there's issues of digital citizenship that's not being addressed, but also security issues. I didn't like that my son would, could they guarantee that every time my son takes his very valuable equipment to school, can you guarantee that it's going to come home, and if it doesn't, if it's stolen, if it's damaged, are you, the school, going to pay for that because it's being used on the property? So that's an issue that I think needs to be done wider. So a great presentation like yours, Jim, would be going towards our government bodies because, and they have to put the money up, and parents have to stop paying for it.
They're gonna get us one way or another.
It's like fundraising for pencils and books all over again, but let's add thousands and thousands and thousands of more dollars.
Yeah, not sure it's a question, but the story that I can tell is this. We, as you can imagine, when you compare me with Jim, very much trailing edge. We're building the basics. We're helping those teachers who aren't that teacher that you just saw. And so these teachers now have a classroom that is Wi-Fi enabled with the appropriate this and that. The kids are bringing their own devices. Now the teacher says to us, it's 11 o'clock at night, I'm frantically looking for something that I can use for the class the next day. I find it. I then try and send it to my students in advance of the class and realize that the app that I've found is for the iPad but not for the Android. Oh my goodness, that teacher says. In the end, what does she do? She prints what she's found.
Yeah.
And this is the future that waits for us. It's exciting. I mean, it really is inspiring, the kinds of things that Jim is talking about, the work that he's doing.
Who's paying for it?
Well, I mean, this is basic research. Don't worry about that. That's important research to be done. It should be paid for by the government, and it is.
Exactly.
I'm worried about that teacher who needs help. I'm worried about those kids
Yes.
who need a great resource to learn from. What those kids have is the technology all around them, but without the content, without the pedagogy, without the resources they need to learn. And what's discouraged me is how little spending that's coming from the schools for the resources that you've seen. And I say again, you happen to be looking at a physical object. It need not be that. It can be that electronic, that digital, that is enhanced and updated on a regular basis. That's there too.
But I really like this idea that books might have something over digital. Part of my work is intangible and embodied learning, which means kids should not have their head locked like this onto a computer monitor as our replacement model for learning. They should be standing up and moving around, as you saw. But I actually have, seen that reading and attending to digital text is not the same, even with a Kindle, which maybe we can solve that, but that there's nothing quite like this. And I think from a psychological standpoint, that's a really interesting and still open research question.
One of the technology-enabled private schools has returned to books because the students they're graduating come to meet me at the university. They can't function. They can't focus, they can't concentrate, they don't know what deep, immersive reading looks like.
Right, that's an important comment, I think. I don't know where, nobody's quite far enough into that to have good evidence about it, but I think there could be something there.
Okay, we have 2 questions in front and 2 in the back. If we have time, we can come back, but we have only 5 minutes, so it should be
I
quick.
do have a question. A technological change.
Just a bit louder.
Technological change is just overwhelming everything. And so the question for both of you is, I can see a device or devices that will do everything, quote unquote. The government will either subsidize or even pay for it. And our universities dead, our schools dead, the expensive infrastructure of schools, public or private, is irrelevant. So the device will be the teacher, the learner, the tutor, the facilitator, the translator, etc. That's here right now. It's not tomorrow. It's right here. So no one knows what's going to happen. So the question for both of you is, presuming that this device that I'm talking about takes over, because it will, how do you see your research or your publishing activity or your consultation currently as being affected?
Let me jump on that quickly. I don't agree. I don't think it's foregone that the device takes over. I think if you look at the movements that are happening today, socially and politically, you're seeing a lot of back to reality almost. The food to table, farm to table movement, 100-kilometer diet. I think the future of the university is not some monster Harvard Inc. with a big sign that you log into. It's going to be Northwestern Ontario, local, for us, by us, tech low, invisible technology. And teachers are going to emerge, I mean, as a positive alternative vision, that teachers are going to emerge as a much more human factor in learning, and that these technologies disappear and become invisible in our pockets when we need them. And so it's not that sort of, it's coming and it's here. I think there's a lot of opportunity for creative educators to change, and they're going to have to change. Schools today, K-12 is not going to work the way it does. University is not going to work the way it does. What's happening in 50 years, who knows? What's happening in 20 years, I think you're going to see a bunch of chaotic attempts to try new things. So that's a short answer. Paul may have
An even shorter answer, the most popular free show at Bay Bluer Radio, the Turntable Show.
Yeah.
We're returning to digital because it does have, and that's what you have in your hand, that's digital. It does have some inherent advantages over the devices. There was another question at the front and then two at the back.
Actually,
Oh, so I'm sorry.
I think one of the things that we're not talking about readily is how our kids, different from us, are accessing knowledge and interacting with knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's just not by books.
Not the same.
It's not, and whatever we think about, books as a nice medium, it's just not happening. For kids, they're not going to books by and large. And so I think what we need to teach our kids is what I think we're hoping to teach them in schools nowadays, around being critical consumers of the knowledge that they are accessing, so that they're not blindly accepting, what they see. And Jim, to see that classroom the way you've set it up is hugely exciting, because I think that's going to, from the standpoint of student engagement, that I think does make a difference in student learning. That we have to kind of go to where they are right now, and I think they're closer to where you are, Jim, in your thinking, than where we are trying to modify the textbooks. So,
Yep. I should tell you, my colleagues have abandoned the digital solution. They're almost all returning to books.
but I want to be honest though.
Yeah, but
I
that's
taught in a university,
Yeah.
and it's not the bastion of great teaching that we think it
I
is.
agree.
Really, it's probably,
That would be because you haven't taught at Osgoode Hall Law School.
Well,
No,
I taught at OISE UT, so I thought that was some of the best places to do that. It wasn't the best teaching that I saw. It was largely Socratic when I taught there 10 years ago. And I'm not sure that much has changed.
At the back.
Okay, we really don't have time. Really quickly. Yeah.
Very quick. I have a cell phone, but I also have a home phone. I read magazines and paper, but I also read newspapers online. What stops somebody from using both? And I, an effective consumer of information, a student, the parents, can easily use that. Pick and choose what is best for them. Some people prefer the written word on paper. Some people prefer, I can't read a newspaper anymore. I've just reached that point. I can't. I need to have it online.
In a few years, you won't be able to buy a newspaper.
Yeah, no,
No.
What stops them is education is not buying that alternative. So that's what stops them.
And as far as Jim's concerned,
In any form. Yeah.
and as far as Jim's, I was fascinated by the stuff that you did, Jim. But how will you be able to measure the difference in learning between a student who learns through the ways you've experimented and the traditional way? I have a feeling that with these advanced students, that there wasn't much of a difference.
Yeah.
Or if the difference is there, it's negligible because they're advanced students.
It wasn't the point of the research, but it's a good question. I mean, we have pre-post measures and deep understanding measures. We did not do a control where we had like a group trying to do something. It's really hard to do control in this kind of work. We use the same teacher, but they taught the old way. That doesn't really work in educational work.
Like, can you test the student, like, to have the class do one way, one do the other, and then measure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to advance a model. Yes, you can do controlled experiments. I think it's important. Got a good question. to the pedagogy, just to point, I think the question Jack asked about the instruction at the higher education level. An interesting thing that struck me, because when I first entered the education field in '95, I was told by one of my senior colleagues at Berkeley, forget about higher education. They're doomed, and they're persistent, they're stuck, and it's the worst form of pedagogy you're ever going to find. Let's focus on K-12. Fast forward 15, now almost 20 years, and it's kind of flipping around a bit. K-12 got bogged down in No Child Left Behind, where now you can't even add a piece of software to a school district without submitting a request to get it sent up to the board, right? And higher ed, and Boise included, has seen this kind of tsunami of online instruction that initially felt like this burden and this kind of labor, but it's opened up all these new innovations about designing your course, flipping your classroom, MOOCs, and all this stuff. It's like this kind of world of innovation that's happening. So technology is not a solved problem. Content's not a solved problem. But I think the technology at least has opened up kind of McLuhan said, you won't know when the new medium comes, you won't be able to kind of see where you're really going to go with it. But you're going to have to go through all this kind of chaos of trying a lot of new things, and I think that's where we are.